In the previous video, we saw the problems caused by attempting to set a default value using the shortened form of the ternary operator. Let's look at more robust solutions for setting a default value. I'll also show you a useful shortcut to test for true or false. I've copied the code from the previous video into default_01.php, which you can find in the chapter 3, 03_06 folder of the exercise files. Line 2 has been commented out, so unit cost doesn't exist. And when we try to use it with the short form of the ternary operator to set a default value, we do get the correct default, but we also get this notice about an undefined variable, which indicates there's probably something wrong with the script. If we uncomment that line, unit cost does exist. Let's just save that and reload the page in the browser. And now we get the default value of 25. But unit cost does actually have a real value. The value is 0. And PHP treats 0 as false. That's why it ignores unit cost here and assigns the value 25. And that may or may not be what you want. With the short form of the ternary operator, you actually don't have any choice. In PHP 7, there's a new operator that solves both problems, and it's remarkably similar. Instead of a question mark and a colon, it consists of two question marks. So I'm going to remove that colon and add a second question mark, and this is what is known in PHP 7 as the null coalesce operator. If the variable on the left of the operator is null or doesn't exist, the operator skips over it without raising an error and assigns the value on the right. Now I'm going to try this in my browser, but remember this is a PHP 7 operator. You won't be able to test this if you're still running PHP 5. But do hang around because I'll be showing you a solution that works in PHP 5 in a short while. So let's just save that and load this into a browser. And the value that has been assigned is 0. That's why it's called the null coalesce operator. 0 is a real value. So is an empty string. This operator, the two question marks, is concerned only with null. In other words, no value at all. So if we comment out unit cost, it no longer exists, and we refresh the page in the browser, it now assigns 25 as the default value. And the important thing to note here is that we don't get any error message. And a useful thing about the null coalesce operator is that you can chain it. So if we add in another non-existent value here, we'll call it non-existent, and then another null coalesce operator, save and reload, we still get that default of 25, but no error is raised either about unit cost or about non-existent. But if I uncomment that line, save and refresh, the value is 0. So it takes the first value that is genuine, even if it's 0 or an empty string that PHP normally treats as false. It only skips over null values, in other words, ones that don't exist. So that's the null coalesce operator in PHP 7. We need to use an alternative approach to setting a default value in older versions of PHP, and also we need to use that alternative approach in PHP 7 if you don't want a falsy value like 0 to be used as the default. So let's switch to this other file here, default_02.php, and what we need to do is to create a conditional statement using if-else, and the condition needs to check if the variable exists. So if PHP has a function called isSet that checks whether a variable exists. So between a pair of parentheses, you need to add the variable that you want to check. That's unit cost. And then between the curly braces, we need to set the value of wholesale price. And we'll set that as the value of unit cost. But if unit cost doesn't exist, if it's not set, we need an else block. And in there, wholesale price will be set to our default, which we'll call 25. So if we save that and then test this in a browser, this will work in all versions of PHP, we get the value 25. Unit cost has been commented out on this line, so it doesn't exist, so this fails. We get the value which is assigned here. If we uncomment this line and save and reload the page, this time we get 0 because unit cost has the value of 0. But let's say you don't want to use the value if it's 0 or if it's an empty string, in other words, a falsy value. To check that, you need to add a second condition to the if block. So after that closing parenthesis of is set, we need two ampersands, the AND operator, and then just the variable itself, unit cost. Now, I have to admit that when I was learning PHP many years ago, this type of condition had me scratching my head for a while. The first part of the condition, is set, is checking whether the variable exists. If it doesn't, the whole condition will fail. But if it does exist, the second part of this condition applies the rules of what PHP regards as true or false. So let's just review what PHP regards as implicitly false. In addition to the Boolean keyword false, the following values are treated as false: 0 as a number or string, an empty string, an empty array, null including unset variables, and a simple XML object created from empty tags. Everything else is true. Consequently, if a variable contains any value other than the Boolean false or the very short list of implicitly false values, it must be true. So we don't need to check if unit cost is 0 or an empty string. This condition will fail if unit cost is implicitly false, and it will succeed if unit cost is implicitly true. So if we just save this and then refresh the browser, we now get the value 25. Unit cost is 0. 0 is treated as being implicitly false, so even though unit cost is set, unit cost here is false. But if we change this to a different value, let's change it to 1, save and reload, then this time the value that is assigned to wholesale price is 1. And something you need to be careful about, don't think that a negative value will also be false. If I make that -1 and save and refresh, the value that is assigned is -1. The only number that is false is 0. So we've looked at a couple of ways of assigning a default value, even if a variable doesn't exist. The solution in PHP 7 is to use the null coalesce operator, which skips over null values without raising an error. The solution that works in all versions of PHP is to use an if-else conditional statement. One final word of caution. Both of these solutions assume that the variable contains the right type of data. If the value has come from an external source, such as an online form, you should conduct further checks before using it. The purpose here has been to demonstrate the basic principle, rather than providing a solution that will work in every case. As you advance with a programming language like PHP, you appreciate more and more that there's rarely, if ever, a single solution that fits every scenario.